Years ago, in South Korea, a young man named Yong-hoo lives with his father, Sergeant Park, after the premature loss of his mother. Despite the difficulties, Park raises his son alone, and at night, he leaves him with his mother and goes to work as a highway patrolman. On another day at work, the sergeant stops a car on the road and asks the driver to roll down the window. However, inside the vehicle, Park sees two young people, apparently in a state of hypnosis, and orders them to take a breathalyzer test. Instead, the young driver, who is wearing a ring in the shape of a crow, accelerates the car and drives off down the road. The sergeant grabs onto the door and tries to stop him, but the driver attacks him and knocks him onto the road, leaving Park seriously injured. The sergeant is quickly taken to the hospital, but there is little chance that he will survive. Fearing he will lose him, just as he lost his mother, Yong-hoo runs to the church and begins to pray, asking God to save his father. At that moment, a young priest sits down next to him and begins to pray with the boy, saying that with the power of faith, anything is possible. Yong-hoo believes this, and later returns home, where he waits for news from the hospital alongside his grandmother. The boy falls asleep, and in his dreams, Park appears before his son, asking him to behave well and help those in need. Yong-hoo does not understand what his father means, but he says goodbye to his son and holds his right hand, from which a strong luminous energy emanates. After that, Yong-hoo wakes up in the middle of the night and receives the sad news that his father did not survive his injuries. The next morning, a funeral is held in honor of Sergeant Park, and the young priest appears to offer his condolences to the family. However, Yong-hoo feels deceived, and overcome with anger, he throws a crucifix at the priest's face, saying that God did not hear his prayers. In the present day, Yong-hoo has pursued a career as an MMA fighter and has become an undefeated middleweight champion. He travels to the United States to face John White, an American fighter who wants to win his title. As soon as the referee announces the start of the fight, John kicks the champion, but Yong-hoo dodges the attack and retaliates with a punch. This blow knocks out his opponent, but the champion is overcome with uncontrollable rage and begins to attack John furiously. Luckily, the referee intervenes in the fight and saves the challenger, with Yong-hoo winning another victory. After that, he travels back to Seoul and falls asleep on the plane, where once again, he has a dream about his deceased father. The two appear to be in a mausoleum, and Park calls his son to follow him to the end of the corridor. There, Yong-hoo sees an altar with a crucifix, and still harboring resentment toward God for the loss of his father, he tries to throw the object away. However, the sacred object sticks to his hand, and soon after, a flame begins to burn Yong-hoo's arm. This terrifying vision causes the fighter to wake up on the plane, but when he sees his hand bleeding, he realizes that the dream was real. Even with this injury, Yong-hoo covers it with a bandage and goes to his apartment to rest for a while. In the middle of the night, a frightening shadow-like entity appears in the darkness and begins to torment the fighter. Yong-hoo cannot open his eyes or move, but when it sees the wound on his hand, the entity flees. Thanks to this, he manages to wake up, but his hand is bleeding, and he heads to a hospital. After running some tests, the doctors say there is nothing wrong and suggest that Yong-hoo seek help at other hospitals. The fighter has no idea what is going on, but his driver tells him that something similar happened to Hong Jin, his niece. At age 15, she couldn't sleep and blood came out of her eyes, until one day she completely lost her sight. It was then that the girl's mother took her to a shaman, who noticed a strong supernatural power in Hong Jin and trained her to learn to control it. The young woman was unable to regain her sight, but she became able to see the supernatural world and tries to help others with her power. Even though he doesn't believe in such things, Yong-hoo asks to meet the young woman, who lives in a sanctuary far from the city. Upon arriving, Yong-hoo meets Hong Jin and shows her the wound on his hand, asking what it was. Through her supernatural vision, she notices a luminous energy in the fighter's hand and says that he can find more answers at a church on the other side of Seoul. Yong-hoo decides to go there, but when he arrives at the church entrance, his path is blocked by a flock of crows. The fighter finds this strange and tries to enter through the back, just as two priests, On and Choi, are performing an exorcism to save a young man in a state of possession. In the middle of the ritual, the young man manages to break free from his chair and attacks Father On, but Choi manages to pull him away. However, the man jumps towards him and spews dark slime from his mouth, causing Father Choi to flee in desperation. Finally, the possessed young man sets out to finish off Father On, when Yong-hoo stops him and throws the madman away. He then tries to hold the man down, but when he does so with his injured hand, a white flame begins to burn the young man's head. Seeing this, Father On seizes the opportunity and pours holy water, causing the flame to grow and burn the evil spirit. Thanks to this, the young man is freed from possession, and Young-hoo realizes that the flame came from the wound on his hand. Upon closer inspection, Father An says that it is a stigmata, a mark similar to the wounds of Jesus Christ when he was crucified. He also says that these stigmata can give abilities to those who have them, such as the power to heal or cast out evil spirits. Even though he refuses to believe it, Young-hoo invites the priest to come to his home, as he wants to know more answers. Once there, Father An says a prayer to keep evil spirits away from the apartment, and upon entering Young-hoo's room, he sees a photo of the young man with his father. It is then revealed that Father An is the same priest who prayed with the young man years ago, before his father passed away. However, he decides to keep this a secret, and before leaving, he leaves a necklace with a cross to protect the young man. Upon returning home, the priest calls the Vatican, saying he has found evidence that a bishop of darkness is in Seoul. This bishop is a servant of evil spirits, responsible for choosing victims and putting them into a state of possession to serve his evil purposes. Unbeknownst to the priest, this bishop of darkness is Ji Shin, owner of a nightclub called Babylon and also responsible for eliminating Sergeant Park. That night, Ji Shin goes to his nightclub and, through a secret door, reaches an altar created in honor of the entity known as the Sacred Serpent. In exchange for immortality and eternal youth, Ji Shin offers the souls of his victims, acting in the shadows of Seoul. However, his path is about to cross that of Father An, who goes to the archdiocese in search of a new assistant, but the other priests refuse to perform exorcisms. Despite his experience as an exorcist, Father An knows he cannot fight the Bishop of Darkness alone. Not knowing what to do, he returns home, where he finds Young-hoo waiting outside. The fighter found his address through a church secretary and says he still needs his help. Even with the protection ritual performed in his apartment, he still can't sleep, and the stigma on his hand continues to worsen. The priest then gives him a rosary blessed by the Pope himself, which will serve as protection against evil spirits. Along with this, An says that the only weapon capable of warding off evil is the power of faith, but Young-hoo reveals that he has stopped believing in God since he lost his father. Upon hearing these words, Father An tells him that he also lost his faith when his mentor passed away after teaching him everything about exorcisms. However, as time went by, he realized that God's intentions are not always clear at first, but faith can bring answers. Since then, Father An has been passing on what he has learned and seeks to help others, although he does not know how long he will be able to continue. Upon hearing all this, Young-hoo begins to admire him and even offers him a ride. On the way, Young-hoo recalls the exorcism performed at the church, where Father An was almost eliminated by the possessed young man. The young man says that it is very risky for him to act alone and offers to help, but Father An refuses, as he does not want to involve him in such dangerous work. Finally, the priest tells Young-hoo to stop at an apartment, where he will respond to another call of possession. Before leaving, he thanks the young man for all his help and heads to the building, but at that moment, Young-hoo has the impression of seeing the image of his father through the priest. Fearing that something might happen to him, Young-hoo decides to go help him and covers the stigma on his hand with a glove. Seeing that he will not give up, the priest accepts his help and the two go to the home of a young mother, whose face is injured as if she had been attacked. She then points to the stairs and says that her daughter, Soo-jin, has been possessed by an evil spirit. The two then arrive at her room, but before entering, Father An draws a cross using a pencil made from a sacred olive tree to prevent the entity from escaping. They then enter the room and find the young woman, who is surprised by their arrival and asks what is going on. The priest believes she is faking it and raises the crucifix in front of her, but Soo-jin places her hands on the object and nothing happens. After that, the young woman says that her mother suffers from severe depression and that she inflicted the wounds on her face herself. The priest is still not convinced and performs another test, touching another cross to the young woman's face, but once again she is unaffected. The priest then calls Young-hoo out of the room and says that despite these signs, the evil spirit may be hiding inside Soo-jin. To test this, the priest runs towards the girl and, with Young-hoo's help, pours holy water directly into her throat. As he feared, the holy water takes effect and the young woman begins to vomit blood, revealing the entity inside her body. With an evil expression on its face, the creature begins to attack the priest and pushes him against the wall. Young-hoo rushes to help him and tries to pin the young woman to the bed, but she manages to levitate her body and pushes him toward the ceiling. Looking the young woman in the face, the fighter sees a red glow in her eyes, and the entity reveals that it was responsible for eliminating his father. This provokes Young-hoo's fury, who pushes the evil spirit back onto the bed and begins to attack the girl. Father An is forced to pull him back, and the two struggle with each other, while the evil spirit encourages the fighter to let himself be controlled by anger. Seeing that he is losing his mind, Yong-hoo calms down, removes his glove, and holds the possessed girl's face, using the power of the stigma on his hand. As he does so, Soo-jin's head is burned by flames until Father An pours the bottle of holy water, expelling the evil spirit once and for all. After the exorcism, the priest calls her into the room to talk and asks if she has interacted with anyone in the last few days. He believes that Soo-jin ended up meeting the Bishop of Darkness and that he was the one who put the spirit inside her body. However, before she can speak, Soo-jin begins to cry tears of blood and feels a sharp pain in her throat. Far away, Ji-shin begins to perform a ritual at the altar of the sacred serpent, and using a voodoo doll, begins a series of attacks on Soo-jin. Seeing the young woman suffering, Father An says a prayer to block the dark magic. Thanks to his faith, Ji-shin's ring begins to burn, as does the voodoo doll, which is covered in white flames, thus breaking the dark bishop's connection with Soo-jin. After this incident, Father An lets the young woman rest for the rest of the night and returns home with Yong-hoo. The two also decide to rest a little, and during dinner they talk about their lives, and the priest asks why the young fighter wanted to help him. Yong-hoo reveals that before his father passed away, he appeared in his dreams, asking his son to help all those in need. For this reason, even though he does not believe in the supernatural or the existence of God, he felt he needed to help Father An, thus fulfilling his father's wish. As the two continue their conversation, Ji-shin performs another ritual, this time sacrificing a crow and asking the sacred serpent to change his appearance. He then takes the form of Father Choi and goes to a Catholic orphanage, where he finds a young man named Ho-sok being attacked by his classmates. After the fight, Ji-shin goes to Ho-sok and promises to help him become stronger so he can defend himself. The young man accepts, and then the Dark Bishop performs a ritual, casting several evil spirits into Ho-sok's body. After that, Ji-shin goes to Father An's apartment, where he sees Yong-hoo leaving to get his motorcycle from the parking lot. The man then calls out to him, saying he is An's former assistant, but he advises Yong-hoo not to trust him, as the priest is actually an evil entity. The young fighter does not believe this and returns home, but these words leave him in doubt. The next morning, Father An receives a call from the orphanage, saying that one of the students has been possessed by a spirit. He then calls Yong-hoo, but due to the suspicions Ji-shin has planted in his mind, the fighter refuses to answer. Soon after, he receives another call, this time from his manager, with a new fight offer in the United States. Minutes later, Father An arrives at the orphanage and sees 4 nuns praying around the boy, who is completely possessed by the evil entity. With no time to lose, the priest holds him, touches the cross to his face, and begins a prayer to remove the entity inside him. The exorcism seems to have worked, but the door to the room closes on its own and the young man gets up. But the door to the room closes on its own and the boy gets up. Along with this, Ho-sok lets out a powerful scream, which affects the brain of one of the nuns and she faints, with blood coming out of her ears. With no idea what is going on, Yong-hoo listens to the businessman's proposal to earn millions for a new fight. However, the fighter senses that something bad is about to happen, and in addition to turning down the proposal, he calls Father An's cell phone, which is answered by one of the nuns at the orphanage. Upon discovering what has happened, Yong-hoo drives to the scene to help his friend. He needs to hurry, as Father An is already exhausted and is attacked by Ho-sok, who begins to punch him in the face. To save the priest, one of the nuns takes his crucifix and tries to drive away the entity inside the boy. However, she does not have enough strength, and Ho-sok jumps towards her and grabs her by the neck. When all seems lost, Yong-hoo arrives at the last minute and throws the young man away from the nun. Again, he is forced to use the stigmata on his hand and places it on the boy's face, causing a white flame to burn his face. Finally, he pours Father An's holy water, causing the spirits inside the boy to burn in the sacred fire. At last, Ho-sok is free from possession, and Father An and the nun are safe. After this incident, the three ask the young man what happened, but he only remembers seeing a man dressed as a priest coming towards him. Father An suspects that this man is the Bishop of Darkness he is looking for and decides to continue his search. He and Yong-hoo let the boy rest. But as they leave the room, the children from the orphanage gather to hug the fighter as a way of thanking him. Yong-hoo is surprised and, at the same time, happy to be fulfilling his late father's wish to help those in need. On the way back, he apologizes to the priest for the delay, but An is happy to see that the fighter is becoming an emissary of God. Yong-hoo still can't believe it, but the priest believes that the young man was sent by the Almighty to fight the darkness. Despite this victory, Ji-shin is still at large and returns to the altar of the sacred serpent to perform another ritual. With that, he takes control of one of the orphanage's guard dogs and frees it from its leash. Shortly after, Ho-sok is sleeping in his room when he hears a voice calling his name. The young man gets up to see who it is, but when he leaves the room, he encounters the dog, which, possessed by Ji-shin, attacks him. After this evil act, Ji-shin offers the boy's soul, and in return receives one of the snake's fangs, containing a powerful poison. Shortly after, Father An receives a call from the orphanage, with one of the nurses informing him of the tragedy that has just occurred. He and Young-hoo immediately go to the morgue, where they find the young man's body with bite marks on his neck. Shocked to see this, the priest says a prayer in honor of Ho-sok, while Young-hoo sees an unknown man on the other side of the room. The fighter suspects that he is the Dark Bishop and runs after him, leaving Father An alone in the morgue. Soon after, the bag where Ho-sok's body is stored begins to move, and when the priest opens it, the boy gets up and asks An to help him. Overcome with guilt, the priest embraces the boy, unaware that it is all an illusion created by Ji-shin, who appears in the room and attacks him with his poisoned fangs. Nearby, Young-hoo hears the priest's screams and runs back to the morgue, where he finds him being held captive by Ji-shin, the Dark Bishop. The villain offers to spare the priest's life if Young-hoo surrenders the power of the stigma in his hand. The young man accepts the terms, but Father An does not want Young-hoo to lose his powers and prefers to sacrifice himself, striking his own face with the poisoned fangs. Within seconds, the poison begins to spread, and Young-hoo rushes to take him to safety. The two then go to Father Choi's house, who, upon seeing An wounded, puts him in his bed and says a prayer to try to reverse the curse. Just as happened with his parents, Young-hoo sees someone he cares about to lose his life, and goes to the chapel to make one last request to God. Before the image of Jesus crucified, he asks for Father An to be spared, but despite his prayers, nothing happens. Once again, Young-hoo feels abandoned and decides to go after the Dark Bishop and save his friend on his own. Before he leaves, Father Choi gives him a gift, a cassock blessed by the Vatican, which will serve as armor against the forces of darkness. Young-hoo obeys, and after putting on the garment under his clothes, he leaves on his motorcycle for Soo Jin's house. There, he asks the young woman where Ji-shin is, and she shows him a card for the Babylon nightclub. Now that he knows the location, Young-hoo speeds off toward the nightclub, and at the entrance he encounters Ji-shin's guards. They have all been possessed by evil spirits and attack the intruder, with Young-hoo using his martial arts skills to stop them. A fierce fight ensues, with Young-hoo facing the group at the same time, blocking attacks and delivering quick punches and kicks. Despite his skill, he is soon overwhelmed by his opponents and is forced to change his strategy. As soon as he gains some distance, the fighter removes his clothes over his cassock, wets the stigma on his hand with holy water, and goes into the second round. Thanks to this combination, Young-hoo strikes the guards' faces with his hand, causing the evil spirits to burst into flames. With only one left, Young-hoo goes to face him and the two exchange punches and kicks, but the fighter gets the upper hand and sets the evil spirit on fire. Now, only Ji-shin remains and Young-hoo goes after him, who is in his hiding place, asking for the help of the sacred serpent. However, the sacrifice required is even greater, and the entity orders Ji-shin to strike his heart with the poison fang. Upon doing so, he falls into the well in front of the altar, and seconds later he returns as a hybrid creature of human and snake. In this new form, the villain challenges Young-hoo to a fight and tries to burn Ji-shin with the power of the stigma in his hand. However, the energy does not cause any damage to the entity, who pushes him against the wall, leaving Young-hoo bewildered. After the blow, the fighter gets up, but in a surprise attack, Ji-shin bites his shoulder and knocks him unconscious. Young-hoo awakens in the middle of an empty setting, and from a portal of light, the spirit of his deceased father appears. He is moved by this reunion and embraces him, wishing to be by his side once again. However, Park says that it is not yet time and that Young-hoo still has a mission to fulfill. So, holding his son's hand, he brings him back to life and awakens even greater energy in the palm of his hand. As soon as Young-hoo returns to the real world, the stigma begins to emit even greater power, creating a white flame in the fighter's hand. Young-hoo then challenges Ji-shin to a final battle, and the two rivals face each other, now on equal footing. In the midst of the fierce fight, the villain strikes his opponent with his sharp claws, but Young-hoo counterattacks with his fist of flames. With the Dark Bishop weakened, the fighter concentrates all his energy in his hand, and with one punch, knocks Ji-shin to the ground. The fight comes to an end and Young-hoo uses the flames to melt the poisoned fangs, saving Father An's life. He then prepares to leave, but before he does, the sacred serpent reveals itself in a form covered in human arms. The entity, however, does not attack Young-hoo, and instead takes Ji Shin's body back to the well as punishment for his failure. After this difficult battle, Yang Hu returns to Father Choi's house and finds An completely healed. Days later, Father Choi is sitting on a bench in front of the lake when he receives a letter from Father An. He is in the Vatican with Yang Hu, who has agreed to undergo training to become an exorcist. In addition to the letter, the priest also left his cross necklace for Choi, as he knows that soon, the evil spirits will return and he needs to be prepared for what is to come.